Something odd struck me on my last rewatch of Breaking Bad, and it's stuck with me since. Walter White almost never tells a complete lie, not a proper one anyway. Not the kind you'd have to build from nothing. Nearly every lie he tells has a load-bearing piece of truth holding it up. And once you notice that, you can't stop noticing it. So that's what tonight is, a long, unhurried walk through every method Walt uses to move people around, sorted by the type of tactic rather than by season. Because honestly, the seasons blur together after the 4th or 5th watch anyway. This isn't a ranking, it isn't a takedown of the show, which I love, and it's certainly not one of those "Skylar was the real villain" videos. She wasn't. We'll get to her. If you enjoy this sort of thing, subscribing helps more than you'd think, and that's the last I'll mention it. 62 episodes, 5 seasons, aired between 2008 and 2013. That's the whole map we're working from. Get comfortable, and let's start at the beginning with a man who hadn't lied about anything important in his life yet. Here's the thing I don't think gets said enough about Breaking Bad. Before it was a show about a man becoming a monster, it was a writing problem, a genuinely difficult one. Vince Gilligan pitched the series to AMC with a line that's been repeated so many times, it's basically folklore now. You take Mr. Chips and turn him into Scarface. Lovely pitch. Clean, memorable, gets you in the room. But if you sit with it for even a minute, you realize how awkward a promise that actually is to keep. Gilligan has described the whole thing as an experiment, the idea being that the character starts off as the protagonist and slowly becomes the antagonist, and that this transformation isn't a side effect of the story, but the actual point of it. Fine in theory. Now look at what he's given himself to work with. Walter White is a 50-year-old chemistry teacher with stage 3 lung cancer. He's not strong, he's not fast, he has no criminal contacts, no history of violence, no reputation, and no idea how any of this works. He's the sort of man who apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it, and the story requires him to end up at the top of a criminal operation that spans state lines, with men like Gus Fring and Mike Ehrmantraut treating him as a legitimate threat. You can't get there with muscle, he hasn't got any. You can't get there with money because he starts with none, and by the time he has money, he's already deep in. You can't really get there with pure chemistry knowledge either, because knowledge alone makes you an employee. Gale was brilliant. Gale ended up dead on his own kitchen floor. So the only route from Mr. Chips to Scarface runs directly through other people's heads. That's not a small realization. It reframes the entire series for me. The meth is the engine of the plot, but manipulation is the engine of the character. Every single time Walt gains ground, he does it by correctly reading what somebody in front of him wants, fears, or is too proud to admit, and then giving them a version of reality that suits him. He is functionally a social engineer who happens to be very good at chemistry, and the show is quite deliberate about showing you the raw material for this before he's done anything wrong at all. Look at the man's starting conditions. He's turning 50. He teaches chemistry to teenagers who couldn't care less, and one of them, Chad, is the sort of smug kid whose girlfriend gives him a disgusted look when he disrupts the class. Then he clocks off and works a second job at Bogdan's car wash, where the same kids turn up and film him drying their wheels. That's a specific humiliation, not a dramatic one, just the grinding, ordinary kind. At home, there's a rule about which credit card the family uses. And I love this detail because the show puts it right after the diagnosis, which is one of the sharpest bits of construction in the pilot. Walt has just been told he's dying. He's sitting there with that information rattling around inside him. And Skylar's asking about a charge at Staples because the MasterCard is the one they don't use. Now, I want to be careful here because a certain corner of the internet took scenes like this and ran an entire decade-long campaign about how insufferable Skylar was. She isn't. She's a woman managing a tight household budget with a teenage son and a baby on the way. And the card rule exists because money is genuinely tight. That's not nagging, that's arithmetic. But it does tell you something about the shape of Walt's life. There are systems in that house, and he isn't the one who made them. He's a man who has been quietly following other people's rules for a very long time. Which brings us to the wound underneath all of it, and this is the one I want to explain properly now because after this, I'll only be nodding at it. Before Albuquerque, before the car wash, Walt co-founded a company called Gray Matter Technologies with Elliot Schwartz and a woman named Gretchen, who he was involved with at the time. Then he left, sold his share for $5,000. The company went on to be worth an enormous amount of money, and Walt spent the following 20-odd years watching it grow from a distance while marking homework. The show never gives you a tidy explanation for why he walked. You get fragments. Gretchen's family, a sense that he felt small around them, something that curdled and never uncurdled. What matters is the residue. Walt carries around a permanent, low-level conviction that he was cheated out of the life he was owed, and that everyone around him has been quietly enjoying a version of success that should have been his. That's the wound. Pride mixed with grievance, marinated for 2 decades. Everything he does later is downstream of it, and I'll be referring back to it constantly, but I won't explain it again. And here's my actual opinion on all this, for what it's worth. I don't think Walt learns to manipulate people. I think he already knows how, and the cancer simply removes the reason not to. That's why the transformation feels so fast in the early episodes and yet never feels cheap. Watch him in the pilot dealing with the fire chief, or with the doctor, or with Skylar. He's already reading rooms. He's already choosing what to say based on what he thinks the other person needs to hear. He's just been aiming it at nothing. All that machinery has been running in a small house in Albuquerque, used for keeping the peace and avoiding arguments about credit cards. Then a doctor tells him he has maybe 2 years, and the machinery gets pointed at something. There's a comparison I keep coming back to, and it's slightly unglamorous, but it fits. You know when someone's been badly underpaid for years and they finally get a job offer somewhere else, and suddenly they're this ruthless negotiator that nobody at the old place ever saw? Same person, same skills. What changed is that they stopped being afraid of the consequences. Walt's version of that is just considerably worse for everyone involved. One more thing about the setup, and then we'll move on. The show is enormously careful in season 1 to keep giving you reasons to stay on his side. The cancer, the son with cerebral palsy, the pregnancy nobody planned, the health insurance that doesn't cover the good oncologist, the friends with money who make him feel like a charity case. All of that is genuine. None of it is fake. But it also functions as camouflage, and not just for the audience. It's camouflage for Walt himself. Every terrible thing he does from here on gets filed under the heading of provision. And because the heading is technically true, he never has to look at what's underneath it. He's wrapping the wrong thing inside the right one before he's even started lying, which, as we'll get into shortly, turns out to be his signature. A couple more things worth mentioning while we're setting the table. The pilot gives Walt a speech in front of his class about chemistry being the study of change, growth, decay, transformation. He says it with a bit of feeling, and the kids are entirely unmoved, and Chad's girlfriend is giggling with his hand in her lap at the back. It's a slightly on-the-nose bit of writing, and I don't mind that at all because the show earns it later. But the detail I like is that he's teaching this to a room of people who aren't listening. He's already articulating the thesis of his own life, and nobody's taking notes. There's also the casting, which I think deserves a mention because it explains a lot about why the manipulation lands. Bryan Cranston was best known at that point for playing the dad in Malcolm in the Middle. The network apparently had reservations, and Gilligan had to push, and the reason he pushed was an episode of The X-Files, where Cranston played a genuinely unpleasant man who you nonetheless ended up feeling sorry for. That's the exact skill the part needs. Walt has to be able to do something appalling and still have the audience's sympathy limping along behind him for another 20 minutes. Which is really the trick of the whole series. Every manipulation we're going to walk through tonight works on the characters, but it also works on us. You watch him lie to Skylar in season 1, and some part of you is going, well, fair enough. He's got his reasons. That's the show manipulating you using the same tools he uses on her. And it takes most viewers until roughly season 3 to notice. The last thing I'll flag before we get properly into it is where all this ends up, because it makes the beginning read differently. In the final episode, Walt says the thing everyone quotes, that he did it for himself, that he liked it, and he was good at it, and he was really alive. Now, plenty of people take that as the mask finally dropping, and I think that's roughly right. But I'd put it slightly differently. I don't think he's revealing a secret he'd been keeping from us. I think that's the first moment in the whole run where he stops managing somebody's perception of him, and the reason he can stop is that he's talking to a woman who already knows everything and has nothing left he wants. There's no advantage left to gain in that kitchen, so he just says it, which means the honesty at the end isn't a change of character, it's the absence of an audience worth performing for. That's a bleak thought, and I've never quite been able to shake it. There's a shot in the pilot I think about more than almost any other in the series. Walt is sitting in the doctor's office, and the doctor is talking, and there's mustard on the man's coat, and Walt has stopped listening entirely. He's not processing the diagnosis, he's already somewhere else. And the very next thing he does, once he's back out in the world, is not tell anybody. That's where all of this starts, not with a lie, with a silence. He drives home, he has dinner, he goes to his 50th birthday party. He lets his wife organize a get-together, lets Hank hand him a gun to hold, lets everybody carry on as normal. And the whole time he's carrying this enormous piece of information around like a stone in his pocket. Days pass. It's Hank's ride-along and the pool and the veggie bacon before anyone in that house knows the man is dying. Now, the generous reading is that he needed time. Fair enough. That's a human thing to want. I'd probably do the same, and I suspect most of us would. But watch what the silence actually buys him, because the show is very deliberate about this. While nobody knows, nobody has an opinion, nobody has a plan for him. Skylar can't research treatment options, Hank can't offer to help, Marie can't ring around specialists, and Walt Jr. can't look at him differently at breakfast. For a man who has spent 20 years inside other people's systems, that gap is the first genuinely free space he's had in a very long time. Information is a resource. That's the whole principle here, and it's the most basic tool in his kit. Whoever holds the most information sets the terms of the conversation. By simply not speaking, Walt keeps himself ahead of everybody in the room permanently, and he never gives that position up. Then comes the ride-along, which is where the withholding turns from defensive to something else. Hank takes him out on a DEA raid, partly as a birthday treat, partly because Hank is the sort of man who genuinely thinks watching a meth house get kicked in is a nice afternoon. And Walt, sitting in the car, sees a familiar figure climbing out of a bathroom window and legging it down the street. Jesse Pinkman, former student. Chemistry, obviously, grade of F if I remember correctly. Walt says nothing. Think about how small that moment is and how much rests on it. One sentence to Hank and the entire series ends before it begins. Jesse gets picked up, Walt goes back to the car wash, cancer runs its course, credits. Instead, he keeps his mouth shut, waits, and turns up at Jesse's door a couple of days later with a proposal. The silence in the car wasn't hesitation, it was Walt recognizing an opportunity and quietly reserving it for himself. And that pattern holds right the way through. Every time Walt declines to say something, he's not avoiding conflict. He's holding an option open. The other thing withholding does, which becomes enormously important later, is that it forces everyone else to guess. And people are terrible at guessing. When there's a gap in the information, human beings don't sit there patiently waiting for facts. They fill the gap with whatever story is nearest to hand. Skylar fills it with affairs and marijuana. Hank fills it with the assumption that Walt is a slightly pathetic man having a midlife wobble. Walt Jr. fills it with the idea that his mother is being unfair. None of them are anywhere near the truth, and Walt didn't have to tell a single lie to get them there. He just left the space empty and let their imaginations do the work. Now let's talk about the fugue state, because that's withholding taken to its logical, slightly insane conclusion. Season 2. bit by a dead bee. Walt has been missing. He was actually with Tuco out in the desert in the worst 48 hours of his life to that point. And when he needs an explanation for the disappearance, he doesn't invent a story about where he went. He invents a hole where the story should be. He turns up naked in a supermarket, gets taken to hospital, and claims he has no memory of any of it. A fugue state, disassociation brought on by stress and medication. And critically, he never has to fill in a single detail because the whole point of the story is that there are no details. I find that genuinely clever in a way that made me sit up the first time. Most people, when they're caught out, over-explain. They add color, they add specifics, they add a reason for every gap, and every addition is another thing that can be checked. Walt goes the other direction. He offers less than nothing. He offers an absence. And it works, right up until it doesn't, because a doctor who suspects he's faking suggests keeping him in for observation, and Walt has to talk his way out of that too. Which he does in a hospital gown in a scene where he's essentially negotiating with a psychiatrist about the price of his own privacy. Here's a fun detail I love about how the series is built. In the very first episode, Walt records a video confession out in the desert, camcorder in hand, waiting for sirens, full name, home address, an apology to his family. It's meant to be his final statement, and it's completely, painfully honest. 5 seasons later, in Confessions, he sits down in front of a camera and records another one. Same opening, name, address, the whole format. And this time, every word of it is a weapon aimed at Hank. The show never points at that rhyme, it doesn't need to. But when you catch it on a rewatch, it lands like a punch to the ribs. Now, I don't want to make withholding sound exotic because it isn't. All of us do this. You don't tell your parents everything. You don't tell your boss everything. There's a version of your life you present at work and a different one you present at 3 a.m. to someone you trust. That's not sinister. That's just how people function. We all understand instinctively that information can be used against us, so we ration it. The line, I think, is intent. Ordinary privacy protects you. What Walt does is different because his silences are always creating a position of advantage over someone who isn't aware they're in a negotiation. His wife doesn't know she's an opponent. That's the part that gets me. And of course, silence has a shelf life. You can only hold a gap open for so long before someone insists on filling it, and then you have to actually open your mouth and say words, which is where the rest of the toolkit comes in. Before we leave the subject, there's a related move I want to point out because it's withholding wearing a slightly different coat. When Walt finally does tell the family about the cancer, he doesn't tell them. He gets ambushed into it, sort of, and then he takes control of the aftermath entirely. Then comes the family meeting, the one with the talking pillow, where Skylar has assembled everybody to persuade him to accept treatment. And it's genuinely uncomfortable to watch because everyone in that room loves him and everyone in that room is talking over him. Marie's being contrary for sport. Hank's doing the tough love thing. Walt Jr. is furious and frightened and swearing about it. And Walt sits there, and when the pillow finally comes to him, he gives this quiet speech about how it feels like he's never really had any say over his own life, and that for once he'd like to make his own choice. That's a real feeling, I'm certain of it. But notice what he doesn't say in that room, which is that he has already decided to do the treatment, and that he has already worked out how to pay for it, and that a former student of his is currently sitting in a mobile home in the desert waiting for him. He lets his family have an argument about a decision that he is making right there in front of them. And he lets them win it so that the money can appear later without questions. That's the fully evolved version of the technique. He's not just withholding a fact, he's withholding the fact that the conversation everyone is having is a piece of theater. I'd also add, and this is more of an observation than an analysis, that the show is unusually good at making silence visually interesting, which is not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of Walt sitting in cars, a lot of Walt standing in doorways slightly too long. Cranston does this thing where he holds a pause about half a second past where a normal actor would break it, and you can feel a decision happening behind his face without being told what it is. Half the manipulation in Breaking Bad is delivered in the gap before somebody speaks, and a fair bit of it is delivered by a man deciding, again, to say nothing at all. Second episode of the entire series. Cat's in the bag. Skylar has found out that a man called Jesse Pinkman rang the house, and she wants to know who he is. I'd put this scene in the top 5 most important scenes in Breaking Bad, and it has no violence, no chemistry, and no stakes anyone would notice on a first watch. It's 2 people in a bedroom having a slightly tense conversation about a phone call. Watch how it goes. Walt starts badly. He genuinely does. He gets vague, pretends he can't quite place the name, does that thing where you repeat the question to buy 3 seconds, and Skylar, who is nobody's fool, immediately shows him exactly what she's got. She's spoken to someone, she knows Jesse was a former student. She's already using words like burnout and druggie. And that's the moment Walt stops flailing and starts working, because she's just handed him the whole blueprint. He could invent something. Old student, needed a reference, wanted advice about night classes. Any of it would technically hold for about a day. Instead, he looks at what she already believes, notices it's drug-shaped, and gives her a drug-shaped answer. He sells me pot, 4 words, and they're doing an absurd amount of work. First, it fits perfectly into the story she's already half written in her head. She came into the room expecting something drug-related and slightly pathetic, and that is precisely what she receives. There's no friction, nothing to argue with. Second, it's a confession, which is enormously powerful. People don't interrogate a confession the way they interrogate a denial. The moment you admit to something, the other person's brain switches from detective mode to judgment mode. And judgment mode doesn't ask follow-up questions. It just tuts. Third, and this is the properly clever bit, it's a smaller version of the actual crime. It sits in the same category. So every future oddity, every phone call, every late night, every unexplained absence has a ready-made explanation waiting for it. She'll think about weed. She will not think about a mobile meth lab in a Fleetwood bounder. And then he seals it by going on the attack. Will you please, just once, get off my ass? Which is such a specific move. He's just admitted to something, and rather than sitting in the discomfort of that, he flips the whole exchange so that she's the one who has behaved badly. Nagging a dying man about a bit of marijuana. Now she feels small for asking, and the next time something looks strange, there's a little voice reminding her what happened last time she made a fuss. That's the template. Confess to a lesser crime that lives in the same neighborhood as the real one. Feed the story your accuser is already telling themselves, then finish by putting them in the wrong, so they end the conversation apologizing. He runs that pattern with variations for the rest of his life. Now, since we're on the subject of building lies out of true material, let's talk about his mother. Walt tells Skylar he's going away for the weekend to see his mother and tell her about the diagnosis in person, which is a lovely thing to do. It's the correct thing to do. It's exactly what a decent son would arrange. And it is completely, entirely a cover story for going into the desert to cook an enormous batch with Jesse. What I find grim about this one is the shape of it. He hasn't invented an obligation. He's identified a real moral duty he genuinely has and is genuinely neglecting, and he's using it as a shield. Skylar cannot say no. There is no version of that conversation where a woman tells her terminally ill husband that no, actually, he can't go and tell his mom he's dying. So the right thing to do becomes the armor for the wrong thing. He's not just lying, he's borrowing the moral authority of a good deed he isn't performing. And the gray matter material works the same way, which is where things get properly tangled. In gray matter, Elliot and Gretchen offer to pay for Walt's treatment. Openly, sincerely, no strings, at a birthday party where Elliot is being about as gracious as a man can be. And Walt says no, because of course he does, because taking that money would mean admitting the shape of his own life. Then he goes home and tells Skylar that he's accepted. That lie survives for ages, and it survives because it's 90% true. The offer was real. She knew about the offer. She'd been pushing for him to take it. All Walt has to do is quietly change one word from no to yes. And suddenly there's a legitimate explanation for hundreds of thousands of dollars appearing. The best forgeries reuse real paper. That's essentially his method. Then it collapses in peekaboo. And honestly, the collapse is more revealing than the lie. Gretchen finds out she's been used as a cover story for drug money. She's furious, and she has every right to be. She rings the house. And here's the part I want to point out, because it's easy to miss on a first watch. Skylar tells Walt that Gretchen called, and Walt immediately asks her what Gretchen said. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't get ahead of it. He doesn't launch into an explanation. He waits. He waits to find out how much has actually been said, because volunteering information into an unknown is the one thing he never does, which turns out to be exactly right because Gretchen hasn't blown it up. All she's told Skylar is that they'll no longer be paying for his treatment. She left the rest alone, out of what I'd guess is a mixture of loyalty to an old friend and sheer disbelief. So now Walt needs a reason why the funding has stopped, and this is where he does something I genuinely find nasty. He tells Skylar that Elliot and Gretchen are secretly broke, that the company is in trouble, that the money was never really there, and that Gretchen was too proud to admit it to her face. It's a plausible lie because it's a real human behavior. People absolutely do hide financial trouble out of pride. Walt knows this for a fact because he has spent 20 years doing exactly that, and he's currently doing it right now in that very conversation. So he takes his own defining flaw, peels it off, and sticks it on to somebody else. She'll never check because it's the sort of story that explains itself. Here's my honest reaction to all of this, sitting with it after however many rewatches. The thing that unsettles me isn't that Walt lies. Lots of characters lie. It's that he never lies against a verifiable fact. Not once, not carelessly. He lies in the gaps between facts, in the joints, in the places where nobody can put a ruler. Everything checkable checks out, which means that for years, anyone trying to catch him would find that every single thread they pulled on led somewhere real. And they'd conclude they were being paranoid. There's a late series example of this that I think is the purest version of the whole technique, and it's easy to miss because it happens in about 40 seconds. Season 5, Confessions. Walt has come back from a fairly rough encounter and his face is marked up. Walt Jr. wants to know what happened, and Walt Jr. is also intending to go over to Hank and Marie's house, which Walt very much needs him not to do. So Walt tells him the cancer's back. True. He tells him that he passed out. Also true. And then he attaches the marks on his face to the fainting, which isn't true at all, and it slides through unnoticed because it's arrived on the back of 2 facts his son has no reason to doubt. And the effect is that Walt Jr., who came in wanting answers, ends up staying home to look after his father, in tears, apologizing for having been difficult. 3 sentences, 2 of them completely honest, 1 small joint in the middle where the weight actually sits. I find that one especially grim because of who it's aimed at, and because the currency he's spending is his own illness. He's been doing that since the pilot, mind you. The cancer is the most reliable object in his kit because nobody in his life is capable of pressing on a dying man, and he knows it, and he uses it right up to the end. The other thing I'd note about this whole family of tactics is how little maintenance they require. If you invent a story from scratch, you have to remember it. You have to keep the details consistent, keep track of who's heard which version, and hope nobody compares notes at a barbecue. That's exhausting, and it's how most liars eventually come unstuck. Walt barely has to remember anything because most of what he said is real. The offer from Elliot and Gretchen happened. The support group exists, the cancer exists, his mother exists. If somebody checks, they find the world exactly as described. There's only ever one small false element, and it's usually a single word. Yes instead of no. a cause attached to the wrong effect, and accepted instead of a declined. Honestly, if you wanted a one-sentence summary of how Walter White gets away with it for as long as he does, it's that. He doesn't build fictions. He edits reality very lightly in one place and then leaves the rest alone. Season 2, Negro y Azul, Jesse's flat. Walt is trying to talk a badly rattled young man into feeling powerful. And the way he does it is by giving him a lecture about fish. The blowfish, he says, puffs itself up 4 or 5 times larger than normal. And why does it do that? So the other scarier fish are scared off. And then the line that I think is the closest thing Walt ever gets to a mission statement. It's just all an illusion. It's nothing but air. He's saying it about Jesse. He is describing himself. The context, if you've not watched it in a while, is that Spooge has died under an ATM machine. And the story going around the neighborhood is that Jesse crushed a man's head with it, which isn't what happened. Jesse was there, Jesse was traumatized, but Jesse didn't do it. And Walt's reaction is not concern, it's delight. Who cares whether it's true, he says, as long as it's the competition who believe it and not the police. That's the moment where you see the strategy laid out plainly. Walt has no muscle, no crew, no history, and no gun he's comfortable holding. What he has instead is a reputation he can build out of other people's assumptions, and reputation is cheaper than force and works at a much greater distance. So the blowfish scene isn't a pep talk. It's Walt explaining his own operating system out loud in season 2, and I love that nobody in the room notices, least of all Jesse, who ends the scene shouting about being a blowfish and taking an enormous bong hit. Perfect character work, that. Once you got the blowfish in your head, you start seeing it everywhere. Tuco is the first proper test. Walt walks into a building occupied by a man who has recently beaten Jesse into a hospital bed, carrying a bag of what he claims is meth, and asks for money. He has no leverage whatsoever. What he has is a bag of fulminate of mercury and a willingness to throw it on the floor and take the whole room with him. And crucially, he introduces himself with a name that isn't his. Heisenberg, which is not a criminal alias, it's a costume. He's dressing up as a man who would do this. The bomb is real, to be fair to him. But the persona around it is manufactured from nothing, and it works, and it keeps working, because Tuco tells other people, and those people tell other people. And by season 3, there's an idea walking around Albuquerque that has almost no relationship to the man sitting in that classroom. Saul is a variation on the theme. Walt and Jesse drive a lawyer out into the desert in the middle of the night, put him on his knees next to a hole, and give him ski masks and a choice. Saul, being Saul, spots almost immediately that these two aren't quite what they're pretending to be. But he plays along because the possibility that they might be is enough. That's the whole thing, really. It doesn't matter whether you'd actually do it. It matters that nobody wants to find out. And then there's the point where the bluff stops being a bluff. And this is the part of the arc that I think the show handles better than almost any other transformation in it. Somewhere in the middle of season 4, Walt stops needing the puffed up version because the real one has caught up. He poisons a child, he blows up a nursing home, he kills Mike. He arranges for 10 men to be murdered in 3 prisons in the space of 2 minutes. By the time he says tread lightly to Hank in Blood Money, the line isn't a performance, it's just information. There's something almost sad in that, and I don't mean sympathetic, I mean structurally sad. The costume grew into the man wearing it. He spent years pretending to be someone who would do these things, and then he became someone who does them, and the pretending became redundant. And yet, right at the very end, the blowfish comes back. Felina, the final episode. Walt turns up at Elliot and Gretchen's house, which is enormous and glassy, and full of the life he decided was stolen from him. He walks in uninvited, terrifies them both, and then explains that he wants them to give his money to his children through a charitable trust, and that if they don't, or if they take it back, there will be consequences, and the consequences are demonstrated by 2 red dots appearing on their chests. The finest hitmen in the country, he tells them. Men who will be watching for the rest of their lives. The hitmen are Badger and Skinny Pete, in a car with laser pointers. He paid them $10,000 each, and they were mildly concerned about the ethics of it. Walt has no organization left at that point. Gus is dead, Mike is dead, Jack's crew is still active, his cancer is back, and he has weeks at most. The threat is completely, totally hollow. It's nothing but air. Exactly as he described in A Flat in Season 2. I genuinely think that's my favorite structural joke in the series. And I use the word joke carefully because it isn't played for laughs in the moment. It's played straight and it's frightening, and then Badger and Skinny Pete are in the car afterwards, worrying about whether they should have done it. Here's my honest read on the whole Blowfish thread. I don't think Walt ever fully stops bluffing even after he's earned the reputation, because the reputation was never really the point. The point was to be perceived as someone who cannot be dismissed, and that need doesn't come from the drug trade. It comes from the classroom and the car wash and a company he walked away from in his 20s. He built a monster out of air because the alternative was continuing to be a man nobody looked at twice. And by the end, when he genuinely is the most dangerous person in most rooms he walks into, he's still standing in someone's house with 2 laser pointers needing them to be afraid. I don't know, there's something almost pitiful in it, right at the end, mixed in with everything else. There's one more scene in this family that I can't leave out, partly because it's the most theatrical thing Walt ever does, and partly because it's the point where the puffing up stops being a tactic and starts being a need. Season 5, Say My Name. Walt is out in the desert negotiating with Declan, a distributor from Phoenix who has an operation, a crew, and no particular reason to be polite. Mike and Jesse are there wanting to sell the methylamine and leave. Declan wants to buy it. And Walt doesn't want to sell. He wants to take over the distribution and keep cooking, which is not what anybody in that conversation came for. So he starts talking. He explains calmly that Declan's product is inferior and that everybody knows it. That the blue meth has a market that no one else can supply. And then he asks the man if he knows who he's talking to. Declan guesses at it. You're Heisenberg, and Walt tells him to say the name. I remember watching that the first time and feeling my toes curl slightly, and I've never fully worked out whether that's admiration or embarrassment. Probably both, because on one level, it's a display of pure command, and it works, and Declan folds and takes the deal. But look at what's actually happening. There is no tactical need for that exchange. The business argument had already landed. The name thing is entirely for Walt, in front of Mike, who has never once been impressed by him, and in front of Jesse, who is leaving. It's a man demanding to be perceived correctly, which, if you cast your mind back to a company he walked away from in his 20s, is not a new hunger. Mike's reaction is the correct one, by the way, and it's about 2 words long. He's tired. He's been tired for a while. And that's the thing about maintaining a persona for that long. Everyone else eventually gets bored of it long before you do. One small detail I enjoy since we're here, the Heisenberg hat. It's a pork pie hat, bought presumably from a shop, and it does absolutely nothing except change how people look at him. He puts it on to go and be someone else, and he takes it off to come home. It's a costume in the most literal possible sense, and the show is perfectly aware of that, which is why it's slightly ridiculous in the early appearances and genuinely unsettling by season 5. And in Felina, he takes it off for the last time in the car, before he goes into the Schwartz house. Which is interesting, isn't it? He does the laser pointer bluff bareheaded. By then, he doesn't need the hat. The idea of him is doing all the work on its own. The White House in early season 2 is one of the coldest environments in television, and almost nothing happens in it. That's what makes it work. There's no shouting, nobody throws anything. It's just a kitchen with too much light in it and 2 people at a table and an enormous amount of silence sitting between them like a third person who won't leave. Skylar has stopped asking questions, which is worse than asking them, and Walt has started cooking breakfast with a slightly manic cheerfulness that fools absolutely nobody. The episode is Down, Season 2, and it contains what I call the single most sustained piece of manipulation Walt aims at his wife in the entire series. Not the most consequential, the most sustained. He goes through about 5 different techniques in one morning, and he loses anyway, which is part of why I like it. Here's the situation. Skylar has clocked that Walt has a second mobile phone. She isn't guessing either. On the night he vanished before the fugue business, she watched him take a call and leave the house, and afterwards, she checked the phone records and there was no call, so she's not suspicious in a vague way. She's holding a hard contradiction. Walt's opening move is to give her an easy way out. He tells her she probably heard his alarm. He's been setting an alarm to remind himself to take his medication, and it sounds a bit like a ringtone. And there you go, mystery solved. Would you like some pancakes? I think that's a genuinely smart first attempt, and it's smart for a reason people underestimate. Most of the time, the person confronting you doesn't actually want a confrontation. They want the problem to go away. So if you hand them a small, dull, boring explanation early enough, a lot of people will take it, because taking it costs nothing, and refusing it costs everything. She doesn't take it. So he moves, and the second move is one of my favorites because it's so quietly awful. He tells her that he's been thinking about going back to the cancer support group meetings, the ones she suggested, and he adds that she was right on the money about that. Look at everything happening there at once. He's changing the subject without appearing to change the subject. He's rewarding her for a previous suggestion, which is a way of putting her in the position of the person who was helpful rather than the person who was suspicious. And underneath all of it, he's quietly manufacturing an alibi factory, because from this point on, there is a recurring appointment in the calendar that she personally recommended and can never really object to. That's 3 separate benefits from one sentence about a support group. The man doesn't waste a move. She's still not buying it, so he escalates into vulnerability. He apologizes for everything. For being distant, for being private, for the cancer, for not being the partner he should have been. He tells her he loves her and he loves his family. And I want to be careful here because I don't think that bit is entirely false. That's what makes it effective. He probably does mean some of it in the moment, but it arrives at a very specific point in a very specific conversation deployed at precisely the stage where the previous 2 tactics failed. And if you're watching the sequence rather than the sentence, you can see the machinery underneath the sincerity. Then, when even that doesn't crack her, he does something that I think is the sharpest thing he does all season. He raises the affair himself. He gets there before she does. Is that what you think? That I'm having an affair? Is that why you asked about the phone? Now, why is that so effective? Because it's the one crime in the building he can actually disprove. He isn't having an affair. He never has. So he's volunteering himself for an investigation he knows he'll pass. And if she chases it, she'll spend 2 weeks proving him innocent of something and come out the other side feeling like a lunatic who accused her dying husband of cheating. It's a decoy shaped exactly like a confession. And it's also statistically the most likely explanation for a middle-aged man's secret phone, which means it doesn't even look like a deflection. It looks like a man finally being honest about what's really going on. She doesn't take it either. And what she says back is one of the best lines Anna Gunn ever gets, because it cuts straight past all of it. She tells him to shut up and say something that isn't complete bullshit. That's the moment Walt runs out of tools, and so he falls back on the last one, which is simply holding the line. He tells her he doesn't know what she wants him to say. He plays baffled. He plays hurt. He keeps his story exactly where it was and waits for her to break first because that's the whole mechanism. If she has even 1% of doubt about her own position, the pressure of a confident, wounded, apparently honest man will find it and press on it until she starts wondering whether she's the problem. That's gaslighting. Not in the loose way people use the word online now, where it means anything from lying to disagreeing with someone. The actual thing. Constructing a situation where the other person's accurate perception of reality is treated as a personal failing until they stop trusting the perception. He does it to his wife, in their kitchen, over breakfast, and I'll leave the word there because I don't think it needs a lecture attached to it. What I do want to say something about is Skylar, because I think the writing in this stretch is far cleverer than it got credit for at the time. She is right about everything, not partially right. Right, there is a second phone. He is lying. There is something enormous going on. And the show constructs the whole season so that being right is completely useless to her because she can't prove it, and because every person in her life, including her own son, will side with the calm, apologetic, terminally ill man over the woman who won't let it go. She loses the argument by winning it. That's a horrible thing to write for a character, and Anna Gunn plays it with this held-in stillness that I appreciate far more now than I did the first time round. For years, the internet decided this made her annoying. I've never understood it, honestly. She's the only person in the show who correctly identifies what's happening while there's still time to do something about it. Her reward is to be treated as an obstacle by half the audience and by every character in her own house. Anyway, that's the domestic version of the toolkit, and it's the version he refines the most because he gets the most practice at it. But manipulation doesn't only work by creating doubt. Sometimes it works the opposite way, by taking doubt away and giving somebody a nice, tidy ending to a question that was keeping them up at night. Now, since we're on the subject of what he does to his wife, there are two later moments that belong here, and they're both about him doing this after she knows everything, which changes the flavor of it considerably. The first is at the start of season 5. Skylar has, at this point, worked out that her husband arranged for Gus Fring to be blown up in a nursing home. She's terrified of him in a way that has nothing to do with suspicion anymore, because there's nothing left to suspect. And Walt comes home, finds her in the bedroom, and tells her that he knows about Ted, and that he forgives her. Then he hugs her, and Anna Gunn plays it like a woman being slowly wrapped in cling film. There's no lie in that scene at all. That's what makes it so unpleasant. He's just quietly rearranging the moral furniture so that he's standing on the elevated bit, and she's the one who needs pardoning, and the fact that he put her in the position that led to any of it never comes up. The second is 51, which contains the only genuinely successful piece of manipulation Skylar pulls off against him. She's been silent and sullen for weeks. Then, at a dinner party with Hank and Marie in the middle of Walt giving a warm little speech about how grateful he is for his family's support, she gets up and walks fully clothed into the swimming pool. It looks like a breakdown. It is, partly. But it's also a performance, staged in front of the two people whose sympathy she needs, and the purpose of it is to make Marie offer to take the children away for a while. Walt works it out almost immediately because of course he does, and he tells her so afterwards in the bedroom. But here's the thing. He agrees to it anyway. I think that's one of the most interesting beats in the season, and it's rarely talked about. He's not agreeing because he's been outplayed. He's agreeing because in that specific week, the children being elsewhere suits him fine. And letting her think she won costs him nothing, which is arguably the most patronizing thing he ever does to her. He lets his wife have a victory the way you'd let a child win at cards. Leverage is a word people use as though it's a thing you discover. You look around, you find the pressure point, you press it. Walt treats it as something you manufacture. If the leverage isn't there, he builds it, and then he uses the thing he built as though it were a fact of nature that he simply happened to notice. Let's start at home, because season 3 has a lovely worked example of this. Skylar has thrown him out. She knows enough now, and she wants him gone, and she's entirely justified. And Walt's response is to simply move back in. He turns up with his things and starts putting them away. So she calls the police, which is her big play. Bring in a uniform, let the sight of a squad car do the work, and he'll leave. Except it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that Walt has already read the situation correctly. The house is in his name. He hasn't hit her. There's no crime being committed in the living room. The officer, who is perfectly pleasant about it, essentially explains that this is a marriage problem rather than a police problem, and that he can't remove a man from his own home. And then he asks Skylar the question that ends the whole thing. Is there anything else? Anything you want to tell me? She could. Right there on her own doorstep, she could say the words and the entire series changes shape. She doesn't. Because Walt has correctly identified that the thing Skylar wants most is not justice, and it isn't even safety. It's for her family to remain a family. Blowing him up means blowing up the house, the kids, her sister, everything. And he knows she won't do it, and he lets the silence prove it. That's the play. He didn't threaten her. He simply arranged a situation where her own priorities did the work for him. Then Walt Jr. weighs in, furious with his mother for pushing his sick father out of the house, and the pressure comes from inside her own family, and she folds. The car wash is the other half of the same story, and it's more interesting because Skylar initiates it. She's the one who works out that he needs to launder the money properly. She's the one who identifies the car wash. She's the one who does the maths, handles Bogdan, and puts herself in the middle of it as the bookkeeper, and she does all of this because she has decided that the least bad version of the future involves controlling the money rather than pretending it doesn't exist. But by pushing for it, she shows him her hand. He can now see with total clarity that she is willing to incriminate herself to keep her family standing. She's already lied to Hank and Marie about where the money came from, and she used it to pay for Hank's rehab, which means she's not a bystander anymore. She's implicated whichever way this goes. So he turns it around. If they're going to sell this story, then he has to be a part of the family. 4 days a week, his own key. That's how we'll sell your little fiction. She needs him now, exactly as much as he needs her, and she's the one who arranged it. He just noticed and charged rent. Now, the criminal side of this. Same principle, higher stakes, and a much more dangerous person on the other side of the table. Gus Fring is not manipulable in the way Skylar or Hank are because Gus isn't running on emotion. He's running on pure long-term commercial reasoning, and Walt understands this and adjusts accordingly. He doesn't try to make Gus feel anything. He makes Gus do arithmetic. The clearest example comes after Half Measures, when Walt runs over 2 of Gus's dealers in the street and puts a bullet in the survivor's head, largely to stop Jesse from doing it and getting himself killed. Gus is, understandably, furious. And Walt's answer isn't an apology, it's a menu. You can kill me here, right now, in the middle of nowhere and stop production. Or you can forgive this and let me keep making you money. That's not a plea, it's a business case. And the reason it works is that Walt has been paying attention to what Gus actually values. He'd previously praised Gus for cornering the market and eliminating his competition, and Gus was visibly pleased by that because it was accurate. But if you've cornered the market, you have a window, and windows close. Everything Gus has built is either won or lost in the next few months. Stopping production out of spite is the single most expensive thing he could possibly do. So Gus does the sums and lets him live, and hates it. And then Gus does the sensible thing, which is to remove the dependency. He brings Gale back, gets him into the lab, gets him watching, gets him taking notes. Once Gale can cook the formula, Walt is a liability rather than an asset, and liabilities in that organization have a very short shelf life. Walt's response is not to negotiate, it's to remove the alternative. I'm going to leave the details of how that goes to the next part of the video because that scene belongs to Jesse rather than to Gus. But the principle is the point here. Walt didn't have leverage over Gus. He created it with a murder. And then he presented the resulting situation to Gus as though it were simply the state of the world. 2 cooks left, both of them ours. Terribly sorry about your man. That's the thing about him that I think is genuinely rare in fiction. Most characters in this position play the board in front of them well. Walt keeps changing the board and then acting surprised about the new shape of it. And there's a line he uses in that stretch that sums the whole philosophy up. He needs me, and if he doesn't go, I don't go. You kill me, you have nothing. You kill Jesse, you don't have me. He's not saying he's valuable. He's saying he's load-bearing. That's a different claim, and it's one he spends the entire series making true by any means available. Mike Ehrmantraut is the interesting exception to all this, and I think he's worth a few minutes on his own, because Mike is essentially immune, not to Walt's threats, which he ignores, and not to Walt's arguments, which he listens to and then declines. He's immune to the framing. Every time Walt tries to build a narrative around him, Mike just steps out of it and describes what's actually going on in about 11 words, half measures. That's his whole philosophy delivered in a bar in about 90 seconds. And it's the only speech in the series that genuinely lands on Walt and changes his behavior. And the reason Mike can't be worked on, I'd argue, is that he doesn't want anything Walt can supply. He's not proud, he's not ambitious, he isn't trying to be seen. He wants money for his granddaughter, and he wants the job done properly, and neither of those things has a handle on it that Walt can grab. So what happens instead is that Walt gets increasingly frustrated, and the frustration eventually comes out as a gun in a car park, which is the crudest thing he does in the entire series, and which he regrets about 4 seconds later. He even says it out loud. He didn't need to do it. There was another way. That's a man discovering the limits of his own toolkit and reaching for the only thing left. Lydia's the opposite case, and much easier for him. She's frightened of everything permanently, and a frightened person is enormously easy to steer because you only ever have to point at the thing they're already afraid of and say, yes, that, and I can stop it. And then there's Todd, who might be the strangest relationship in the show because Todd requires no manipulation whatsoever. He simply does what he's told, cheerfully, whatever it is. Walt spends the entire series constructing elaborate machinery to get people to comply, and then gets handed a young man who complies by default. And I've always thought the show finds that quietly horrifying rather than convenient, which tells you what the whole thing runs on, really. You can only get a grip on somebody who wants something. Mike doesn't want anything Walt has got, so there's nothing to hold on to. Todd wants to be useful, which means there's nothing to work around either. Everyone in between is fair game. There's a phrase Walt uses more than once in slightly different forms, and it's worth noticing as a tell. We're done when I say we're done. That's what he tells Saul in an office after Saul tries to end the relationship. It's not an argument, and it's not a threat with any specific content in it. It's just an assertion about who controls the exit. That's what all of this is ultimately about, I think. Not money and not really safety. Doors. Who gets to open them and who gets to close them? Skylar couldn't throw him out. Gus couldn't fire him. Saul couldn't quit. Jesse couldn't leave. And each of those is achieved by a different method with a different pressure applied, but the outcome is identical every single time. Nobody gets to end a relationship with Walter White except Walter White. That's the actual product he's been manufacturing all along, and the meth is just how he pays for the equipment. People can live with bad news. What they can't live with is an open question. I'm fairly convinced that's the most useful thing Walter White understands about human beings. And it's a different skill from lying. Lying is about what you tell people. This is about giving their brains somewhere to stop. An unanswered question is an itch. It sits there while you're driving, while you're falling asleep, while you're pretending to listen to someone at work. And the moment somebody hands you an answer that's roughly the right shape, the itch stops, and the relief is so pleasant that you don't examine the answer very hard. Walt has understood this since roughly episode 2, and he uses it constantly. Whenever somebody comes at him with a worry, he doesn't just deflect it. He hands them a completed story with a beginning, a middle, and a resolution, and then he closes the door. Picture Hank sitting on a toilet in season 5, holding a copy of Leaves of Grass, going very still. Everyone remembers that shot. Almost nobody remembers that the reason a Walt Whitman book is dangerous at all is a conversation 2 seasons earlier that Walt won. So let's go back to that conversation because it's the cleanest example of the technique in the series, and it involves the two most dangerous letters in the alphabet. Bullet points, Season 4. Hank has been given Gail Batiker's lab notebook. He's poking through it in his garage, half out of boredom, half because Hank cannot leave a puzzle alone, and he finds a dedication to WWW. My star, my perfect silence. And Hank, being Hank, starts turning it over out loud in front of Walt. Who's W. Woodrow Wilson, Willy Wonka, Walter White? There's a version of this scene where Walt goes pale and changes the subject, and that version ends the show early. Instead, he leans in. He takes the notebook, flips through it, finds the Walt Whitman poem sitting there in Gail's own handwriting and points at it. Hank says, Woodrow Wilson, Willy Wonka, Walter White, and Hank laughs, and the question closes and it never reopens. That's the whole technique in one gesture. He didn't argue Hank out of the idea. He gave him a better answer, a more satisfying one, with actual evidence sitting on the page. Hank's brain got its ending and filed the whole thing away. And that's why the bathroom shot lands the way it does. Walt escaped by hiding behind Walt Whitman, and the shield turned out to be the exact object that ends him. Nobody in the show ever says that out loud. They don't have to. Now, the other place he does this is with Skylar in Open House. And this one I find funnier in a bleak way. Bit of context first. At the end of 38 Snub, Walt has gone to Mike with a proposal that they team up and kill Gus. Mike's response is to knock him around a bar and leave him on the floor. It's a comprehensive beating, delivered by a man who is completely calm about it, and Walt wakes up with a face like a dropped pie. So when Skylar rings him about the car wash and then sees the state of him, she does the sensible thing and worries. She wants to know what happened. She starts talking about going to the police. And Walt's answer is that it was a bar fight. A co-worker, bit of a scuffle, got out of hand. Then he adds the bit that does the actual work. He says it might have been a good thing because afterwards they cleared the air and now there's a mutual respect. That's not a denial, it's an epilogue. He's taken a frightening, open-ended event and stuck a resolution on the end of it. And the resolution is positive, so there's nothing left to worry about. Mystery has a beginning, middle, and a slightly heartwarming ending about two blokes who sorted it out. Then, and this is the bit that makes me smile every time, he promises that if things ever get dangerous, he'll go to the authorities, and then he says, right, so car wash. He hands her back the conversation she originally wanted, the one he refused her at the start. It's a reward for accepting the story, and it redirects her attention onto her own favorite subject. And once she's talking about the car wash, she is absolutely not thinking about his face anymore. It's a magician's move. Watch this hand, ignore the other one. The bigger version of this is the gambling story, which is the most ambitious ending Walt ever hands to anybody, because it isn't for one conversation, it's for years. He and Skylar need a source for a large amount of money that Hank and Marie will accept. And Skylar, who is by this point a genuinely excellent liar herself, builds the whole thing. Walt learned to count cards. He's been playing, he got very good at it, and he got secretive about it, and it became a bit of a problem. They actually rehearse it. Skylar writes it out. There's a scene where she's timing his emotional beats like a director, and Walt is sulking about the staging of his own fake confession, and I'd argue it's one of the funniest scenes in a show that isn't often trying to be funny. But look at what the story does once it's out in the world. Hank and Marie now hold two large pieces of information about Walt, the cancer and the gambling. And between them, those two things explain literally anything he might do. Bruises on his face, gambling, acting strangely at dinner. The cancer, disappearing for 2 days, take your pick. Money appearing out of nowhere, obviously gambling. He hasn't just closed one loop, he's installed a permanent explanation generator in the heads of the two people most likely to catch him. And notice that the story he chose isn't flattering. It's a shameful thing to admit, a compulsion, a weakness. That's deliberate. If he'd come home with a clean success story, they'd have asked questions. confessing to something slightly sordid makes the listener feel trusted, and a person who feels trusted stops looking. Which brings me to hazard pay and the scene I find hardest to sit through in the whole of Season 5's first half. And I've thought about why, and I think it's because there's no violence in it at all. Skylar has had a breakdown. She's walked into a swimming pool at a dinner party, fully clothed in front of her sister. Marie has come round to find out what on earth is happening, and she will not leave without an answer, and she's asking Walt because Walt is the calm one. Walt could give her the gambling story, could give her the cancer. Both are available, both would work. He gives her Ted. He tells her that Ted Beneke has had an accident and is badly hurt. And then he tells her that Skylar had an affair with him. And then, beautifully, he asked Marie not to tell Hank, because he doesn't want Hank thinking less of them. That request is the load-bearing beam. It converts information into intimacy. Now Marie isn't just being informed, she's being confided in. She's holding a secret for him. And Marie, who arrived in that house prepared to be angry at Walt, gets up to leave and stops and hugs him because she feels sorry for him, cheated on while dying of cancer. He traded his wife's worst moment for a hug from her sister, and I don't think he thought about it for more than 4 seconds. It just seemed like the most efficient available option. Now, in fairness, this doesn't always work. And I want to spend a minute on a time it fails badly because the failure tells you something. Season 4, Cornered. Skylar has realized from the black eye and everything around it that her husband is in genuine physical danger, and her instinct is protective. She starts talking about the police, about protection, about how there are people out there who might hurt him. And Walt, sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle in front of him, does not give her an ending. He goes the other way entirely. He tells her that she's got it backwards, that she thinks he's in danger from some big bad man when in fact he's the one who's dangerous. A man opens his door and gets shot, and she thinks that's him. It isn't. He's the one who knocks. That's the famous speech, obviously, and it's magnificent, and it's also a catastrophic tactical error, which I don't think gets said enough. Every other time we've seen him in this position, he's given her something small and boring to hold. Here, he gives her the actual truth in the most alarming phrasing available because his pride has got the better of him, and he simply cannot stand being pitied by his own wife. And what happens next is directly caused by it. Skylar takes Holly and drives to Four Corners and stands there deciding whether to leave. She's genuinely trying to get out. The reason she's out there at all is that Walt couldn't resist showing off for 10 seconds in his own kitchen. I quite like that the show does this because a manipulator who never slips would be boring and also slightly unbelievable. Walt's technique is excellent. His discipline is not, and the gap between the two is where nearly all his real problems come from. The other thing that fails eventually is the shelf life. A supplied ending only holds for as long as nothing new arrives to disturb it. Hank spends 2 seasons perfectly content about the WW business right up until a book appears in the wrong bathroom. And then every settled question in his head springs open at once. That's the risk with this technique. You're not destroying the question, you're just putting a lid on it and lids come off. Hank Schreider is loud, he's crude, he makes his brother-in-law hold a gun at a birthday party, and he tells jokes at exactly the wrong volume in exactly the wrong rooms. He's also, and I'll happily argue this with anyone, the most decent person in Breaking Bad. He does his job properly. He's genuinely good at it. He looks after Marie through some fairly difficult years. He panics in a car park after Tuco and can't tell anyone, and then he goes back to work anyway. And when he finds out the truth in a bathroom holding a book, his very first instinct is to be sick about it rather than to be clever about it. The reason I'm laying all that out is that Hank's decency is precisely the thing Walt uses against him. Every single time. Not his ego, not his temper, his good qualities. Start with the bias because that's the foundation. Hank cannot picture Walt as a criminal. It's not that he's dismissed the idea. The idea has never assembled itself in his head because his mental image of Walt is fixed. Nervous chemistry teacher, bit sad, needs looking after. He says as much repeatedly, always affectionately, always with that slightly patronizing warmth that older brothers-in-law specialize in. So Walt's most reliable move around Hank is simply to be exactly the man Hank already thinks he is. There's a lovely small version of this when Hank is washing a bench where Badger is supposed to meet the fake Heisenberg. Walt needs Hank's view blocked, and rather than arranging anything elaborate, he parks next to him and gets out and starts chatting. Bumbling, oblivious, "What are you doing here? Fancy seeing you, Stati, is everything all right?" Hank's irritation at being interrupted by his hopeless brother-in-law is the exact emotion required for the plan to work. Walt is using Hank's low opinion of him as a tool, and there's something almost gleeful in the way Bryan Cranston plays it. Then there's Sunset, which contains what I'd call the most efficient manipulation in the entire series. Hank has tracked the RV to a scrapyard. He knows it's in there. Walt and Jesse are inside it, with a door between them and a DEA agent who is one warrant away from ending everything, and there is genuinely no way out. Walt tries talking through the door. Doesn't work. There's a lawyer stalling call. Doesn't work either. Hank is trying to open that door. And Walt makes one phone call, and it's over. Saul's assistant rings Hank pretending to be a hospital. Marie's been in an accident. She's critical. Hank runs. That's it. That's the whole escape. And it works because Walt has correctly identified the one thing Hank values more than the biggest case of his career, which is his wife. There's no cleverness in it. There's just an absolutely accurate reading of what matters most to a man and a willingness to reach directly for it. The cost, incidentally, is enormous, and the show is honest about it. Hank spends the drive to the hospital in a state of pure terror, and when he finds out it was a hoax, he goes looking for someone to hurt. And the person he finds is Jesse. That beating in 1 minute nearly destroys Hank's career and does destroy Jesse's face. Walt made that phone call. Neither of those men ever fully recovers from what followed. Then there's the bug in Hank's office. Walt needs a listening device in there, and to get it, he needs Hank out of the room for a couple of minutes, so he sits down and falls apart. He starts talking about the cancer and his family and how frightened he is, and he cries. And Hank, who is a man of his particular generation and profession, is so profoundly uncomfortable at the sight of another man weeping in his office that he makes an excuse and leaves. Walt turned male emotional awkwardness into a tool. That's what happened there. He looked at his brother-in-law and identified that Hank's discomfort with feelings was a reliable, exploitable mechanism, and then he pulled the lever. And the worst one, for my money, is the car. Hank has worked out that there's an industrial laundry involved. He asks Walt to drive him there because Walt's the one with the car and Hank's still recovering. And Walt, sitting in the driver's seat, realizing that in about 15 minutes his brother-in-law is going to be standing on top of a super lab, pulls out into the path of an oncoming vehicle. He crashes his own car with Hank in it deliberately and puts him back in hospital. And he gets away with it because Hank forgives him. Because Hank's assumption is that his brother-in-law had a moment of confusion or a lapse from the medication, because that's what a nervous chemistry teacher would do. I want to sit with something for a second, because I think it's the real substance of this whole section, and it's not a plot point. There's an argument that all of this is just tactical. Walt needed Hank out of the way, and Hank had exploitable qualities, and so he used them. Fine. But watch the way he does it. There's a pleasure in it that keeps leaking out around the edges. The parking scene, the office scene, the moment on the roof of the laundry when Hank is millimeters from the truth, and Walt is standing behind him talking about how it's just a laundry. I think a lot of it is punishment. 20-odd years of being the small man at the family barbecue. 20-odd years of Hank being loud and successful and clapping him on the shoulder and meaning nothing but affection by it. Hank never thought less of Walt out of malice. He just never thought much about him at all. And I'd say the show is fairly clear that being unnoticed did more damage to Walter White than being insulted ever could have. So he turns every one of Hank's good instincts into a handle, and he pulls on them, and Hank keeps handing him more, right up until the desert. I want to finish this section with the last thing Walt does to Hank because it's the technique in its final, fully assembled form, and it's the one that makes me genuinely angry every time. By this point, Hank knows. The book's been found, the garage door has come down, and the two of them have had the conversation where Hank tells him to admit what he is and Walt tells him to tread lightly. That's the end of any pretense between them. So Walt makes the DVD. And what's on it, for anyone who hasn't watched it in a while, is a confession. Full name, address, the whole format, delivered with tears in his eyes. Except in this version, Hank is the mastermind. Hank ran the Heisenberg operation. Hank forced his terrified brother-in-law to cook meth for him under threat to his family. Hank used his DEA position as cover. There's a bit about the bombing, and there's a bit about how frightened Walt has been. It's a complete inversion, and every single verifiable detail in it is accurate. Then comes the piece that finishes Hank off, and it's a piece of luck Walt is delighted to use. Hank's rehabilitation was paid for with drug money. Marie took it, believing it was gambling winnings. So there is now a documented financial trail connecting a DEA agent to Walter White's meth income. Hank sits there watching it with Marie, and the look on Dean Norris's face as he works out what's just happened to his career, his marriage, and his case is some of the best acting in the series. He can't move. If he takes it to his superiors, that DVD goes with it. And I don't think he ever fully recovers his footing after that, right through to the desert. So the last handle Walt pulls on isn't Hank's love for his wife, or his discomfort, or his bias. It's the one act of genuine kindness Walt ever did for him, which was quietly paying for his physical therapy, turned into a weapon years later at the exact moment it would do the most damage. That's the man, really. And while we're here, a word about Marie, who gets even less credit than her sister. Her instincts are consistently right. She's the one who says, very early on, that something is off. She's the one who eventually pushes hardest for the truth once it's out. And her reward for all of it is to spend 2 seasons being treated as the shrill one, in purple, in a house with a man who won't talk to her. The Schraders are, when you strip it back, the only functional marriage in the show. They're difficult with each other, they're both stubborn, and they stay, which makes what happens to them land considerably harder than it otherwise would. Anyway, that's Hank. Decent man, badly used, and he still very nearly gets there in the end. Before any of the grim stuff, I want to say the obvious thing about Walt and Jesse, which is that the relationship is genuinely the best thing in the show. They save each other's lives repeatedly. They're funny together. In that way, where two people who have nothing in common are stuck in a confined space for too long. The teacher and the failing student, the father and the son that neither of them asked for. There's real warmth in it, and the warmth isn't fake. Walt does care about Jesse, that's not in doubt. And if it were, the whole thing wouldn't hurt. It's just that caring about someone and controlling them turn out to be extremely compatible. The first proper example is the money, and it starts from a reasonable place. Gus tells Walt at some point that you can never trust a junkie, and Walt takes that on board. So after a large payday, he refuses to hand Jesse his share while Jesse is using orders, on the grounds that a man with that much cash and that much heroin in his life will be dead inside a week. And honestly, he's not wrong about that. It's the correct read. But look at what it means practically. Walt is now holding the money, which means Walt is holding the terms, which means Jesse cannot leave. Then Jane works out what's happening and blackmails him. She tells him plainly that she'll go to the DEA unless Jesse gets his share. And she means it, and Walt has no answer, so he hands the money over. That's the crucial thing about Phoenix that I think gets flattened in most discussions of it. Before anything happens in that bedroom, Walt has already lost. He's out of leverage, out of options, and out of control of his own situation, which is the one condition he genuinely cannot tolerate. And then he goes round there in the middle of the night to talk, and he finds them both unconscious, and in reaching over Jesse, he knocks Jane onto her back, and she begins to choke. He could turn her over, it would take a second and a half. He doesn't. I've heard the argument that Jane was leading Jesse into a worse place, and there's something in that she absolutely was. But the argument misses what the moment is actually about. Walt isn't weighing Jesse's welfare in that room. He's watching a problem solve itself. Jane's death removes the blackmail, removes the competing influence, removes the plan to run away to New Zealand, and returns Jesse to a state of total dependence. And it works perfectly because in the morning, the first person Jesse rings is Walt. That's the part that I find genuinely hard. The man who let her die is the man Jesse calls for help, and he arrives and he cleans it up and he's kind about it, which cements the whole thing for years. Whatever else you say about Walt's intentions in that room, the result is that he took a choice away from someone. Jesse never got to decide whether to leave with her or get clean with her or fall apart with her. Walt made the decision on his behalf and then comforted him about the outcome. Right. Half measures, and the same instinct applied differently. Jesse wants to kill 2 of Gus's dealers because they used an 11-year-old boy to murder Combo and then killed the boy as well. It's the most morally clear position anyone holds in the entire series, and it is also completely suicidal. Walt's first move is to ask Saul to have Jesse arrested for something small, to get him off the street for a few days until it passes. When that isn't practical, he does something much worse. He tells Mike about Jesse's plan, which forces a meeting, which forces Jesse to either accept a truce or die. And Walt stands in that meeting and lets it be known that the only reason this conversation is happening at all is because of the respect Gus has for him. 2 results from 1 move, he scores points with his employer, and he reminds Jesse in front of witnesses that his continued existence is a favor Walt arranges. Then full measure and the debt, which is a move I think everyone recognizes from ordinary life even if they've never had to use it in a drug war. Gale needs to die because Gale is the replacement, and Walt can't do it because he's under guard, so he goes to Jesse with a debt. I saved your life, Jesse. Are you going to save mine? That's not a request, it's an invoice, and it's aimed at the single most exploitable thing about Jesse Pinkman, which is that underneath everything, he keeps score honestly and he pays what he thinks he owes. Walt's original pitch is that Jesse only needs to get him the address and Walt will handle the rest. That's not how it ends. Cornered with Mike about to kill him, Walt talks his way into making a phone call and then shouts down the line at Jesse to do it. Do it! Do it, Jesse, do it. The last thing we see is Jesse crying, pointing a gun at a man who has done nothing to him. Now, the one I want to spend proper time on because it's the purest bit of manipulation in the series as far as I'm concerned, and it's all dialogue. Season 4. Walt needs Jesse to help him kill Gus, and Jesse isn't interested because Gus has been treating him decently, taken him to Mexico, given him responsibility, told him he sees something in him, which is possibly the first time anyone has said that to Jesse in his adult life. So Walt sits him down and takes it apart, and the way he does it is entirely a matter of language. First, he raises the doubt. A month ago, this man was trying to have us both killed. Then he quotes Jesse's own words back at him. He says he sees something in you. What kind of game is he playing? Notice the framing there. Everything Gus is doing is described as manipulation, which conveniently deflects from the manipulation currently in progress. And every sentence is delivered from Gus's imagined point of view rather than Walt's. Because here's the thing, if Walt had just said, look, I don't trust him, he tried to kill us, I think this is a trap, that would be honest. Not nice, but honest. He'd be offering his opinion and letting Jesse decide. Instead, every line is built as an insult to Jesse's intelligence coming from Gus. Does he really think you're that naive? He can't truly think you'd forget Gale, let alone Victor and all the horror that goes with that. And then he goes for the deepest wound available, the girlfriend and her little brother. The man looked you in the eye and told you no more children, and that very night that little boy winds up, he doesn't even finish it. He lets Jesse's mind supply the word and then supplies it himself anyway. In the hospital. By the end, Jesse is telling him to drop the sales pitch and agreeing. I'll be straight with you. That scene, not any of the killings, is the one I find hardest to watch because it's a man who knows exactly where every bruise is, pressing on all of them in order in a calm voice in a kitchen. Two smaller things before we move on because they show the same instinct working at low volume. The first is Fly, which is either your favorite episode or the one you skip, and I'm firmly in the first camp. Almost nothing happens. 2 men in a lab, one contaminant, an entire night. And somewhere in the middle of it, exhausted and sedated and talking rubbish, Walt gets very close to telling Jesse about Jane. He starts circling it. He talks about being in a bar, meeting a man, and only realizing much later who it was. He says he's sorry about the girl and he means it, and for a moment the whole thing is about to come out. Then he stops. Even half-conscious on a stepladder, he stops. I've always read that episode as Walt discovering that he no longer has an off switch. He's looking for the moment he should have died and can't find one, and the confession that's queued up behind his teeth doesn't get out because the machinery keeps running even when the man is barely awake. He does eventually say it, mind you. Much later in Ozymandias, out in the desert with Jesse tied up on the ground and about to be dragged off to a cage. Walt looks at him and decides there's one more thing worth mentioning, and what he mentions is that he watched Jane die, that he was there, that he could have saved her, and that he chose not to. I've heard that described as Walt finally being honest, and I've never accepted it. Look at when it arrives. Everything is already gone by then, so there's no advantage in it and no plan behind it. It's simply the last available way to hurt someone, which is its own sort of proof, I suppose. Even the truth, when he finally hands it over, is being used as a tool. The second is a much quieter bit of interference in hazard pay, and it's the one that made me sit forward the first time. Jesse has a relationship with Andrea. It's good for him. It's the most stable thing in his life. And Walt, sitting on a sofa with a beer, tells him so, says he's seen them together, says it looks like a good thing. And then, gently, he adds that if Jesse really loves her and wants a life with her, he should probably tell her everything because secrets aren't good for a relationship, which sounds like decent advice from a father figure. It's the most poisonous sentence in the episode, because Walt knows perfectly well that Jesse can't tell her the truth and that being told he ought to will sit in him and rot until he ends it himself. Jesse breaks it off a few days later and Walt never has to say another word about it. That's the version of this I find most instructive, honestly. No shouting, no leverage, no debt. Just one piece of advice that sounds like care, aimed precisely at the one relationship that might have given Jesse somewhere else to stand. There's a plant sitting in a pot by the White family swimming pool. The camera finds it right at the end of season 4, slowly, and holds on it, and that's all the show gives you. Lily of the Valley. Pretty little white bell-shaped flowers, the sort of thing you'd walk past in a garden center without a second glance, and thoroughly poisonous if a child eats the berries. We'll get to what that pot is doing there. First, I want to talk about money and a conversation in season 5 where Jesse tries to leave. The setup is that there's an offer on the table. $5 million each to walk away from the methylamine. Mike wants out. Jesse wants out badly because a child died on the train tracks in front of him, and he hasn't slept since. And Walt does not want out, so he takes Jesse apart in stages. He starts with potential, which is a lovely word for what he's actually doing. He tells Jesse that being genuinely good at something is rare, and that you don't just throw that away. Teacher voice, encouraging on the surface. Then he asks what Jesse would do instead. Before Jesse can properly answer, he supplies the answer himself. Video games, go-karts. That's a very precise pair of insults. He's not saying Jesse would fail, he's saying Jesse would be a child, which taps directly into the dynamic that has held these two together since the pilot, where Walt is the adult and Jesse is the boy who needs supervising. And it reframes the entire decision. Staying is grown up, leaving is a tantrum. Then he strips him down, reminds him he has nobody, no family, no partner, nothing waiting for him. And then he goes to the bottom. How long before you start using again? I don't think there's a lower point in the relationship than that line, and there's a lot of competition. Then, having gone that low, he does something that shouldn't work and does. He repositions himself as the wounded party. He says he's just as torn up about the boy as Jesse is. And when Jesse questions that, Walt turns it around, hurt and indignant. How can you say that to me? I'm the one who's a father here. True, technically. Doing an enormous amount of dishonest work, but technically true. That's a pattern by now. And when Jesse finally holds firm, when he's exhausted every objection and just wants his share and out, Walt reaches for the last thing available, which is the money itself. If you're so tormented by what we've done, why do you still want the filthy drug money? That's a genuinely vicious bit of reasoning, and I'll admit it's also brilliant. He's not making an argument. He's activating the part of Jesse's brain that remembers what he went through to earn it, so that Jesse starts internally building a case for why he deserves it, which puts him back inside the frame Walt wants him in. And then, having lit that fire, Walt turns around one final time, gentle as anything, and says, "You want it. You want it as much as I do." And it's not wrong to want it. Jesse leaves anyway with nothing. I always find that quietly heroic, actually. Right, the plant. Season 4, End Times. Walt has run out of everything. Gus is going to kill him, his family is at Hank's house under DEA protection, and Jesse is now working for the other side, and has been told by Gus that Walt is a dead man. The one thing Walt needs is Jesse back. So Brock, Andrea's 6-year-old son, ends up in hospital, critically ill, and Jesse concludes that he's been poisoned with the ricin that Walt made, and that Jesse has been carrying around in a cigarette, except the cigarette is missing from his packet. It was taken by Hyoel, Saul's enormous, quiet bodyguard who lifted it during a hug in Saul's office on Walt's instruction. Season 5's 12th episode confirms all of this in about 30 seconds of dialogue, with Saul admitting with visible discomfort that he had no idea what Walt intended. I love that Saul is the moral barometer in that scene. When the ambulance chaser in the shiny suit is the one who looks queasy, you know roughly where you are. So Jesse comes to Walt's house with a gun, and this is where the whole thing turns into something extraordinary. Because Walt wanted this. He wanted Jesse to suspect him. That's the design, and the reason is that a suspicion Walt can dismantle in person is far more useful than a doubt sitting quietly in Jesse's head. If Jesse comes to him with it, Walt can take that murderous energy and point it somewhere else. So he opens the door as a frightened man. Paranoid, powerless. He doesn't defend himself because defending yourself looks like guilt. He lets Jesse push him around, lets him search the house, and then he starts building. He acts astonished at the brilliance of the plan he's describing, which is really him admiring his own work out loud, and which is precisely the thing a guilty man would never do. He ties it to the story he's already established, that he's been sitting there all day waiting for Gus to send someone to kill him, and it turns out to be you. Then he offers possibilities rather than assertions. Maybe Gus's people took the cigarette. Maybe Gus knew about the ricin all along. He controls everything, there are cameras everywhere. And then he lays out the true parts, one after another, all of which Jesse already knows. Gus replaced Walt with Jesse. Gus doesn't need Walt anymore. Gus has been separating the two of them for months. Every one of those is a fact. And from those facts, the conclusion assembles itself. Gus manipulated you into coming here to kill me. He never actually asserts the conclusion. He lays out enough true parts that Jesse assembles it himself, which is the same move as the pot in season 1, just aimed at a man holding a gun. And the last piece, the one that makes it survivable, is the plant. He never used the ricin on Brock at all. He used lily of the valley, which produces similar symptoms and which any child might eat off a bush, which means that even if it all falls apart, even if the ricin turns up in Jesse's pocket, there's a plausible, innocent explanation sitting in a hospital chart. I do love the small detail in Live Free or Die, where Jesse is tearing his house apart looking for the cigarette, and Walt is helping, and Jesse pulls the Roomba out from under the sofa, and Walt asks what the hell it is. He knows exactly what it is. He'd already planted the cigarette inside it minutes earlier when Jesse wasn't looking. He just wanted to be a man who doesn't know about robot hoovers for a few seconds. When it works, Jesse breaks down, sobbing, apologizing, ashamed of himself for having doubted his friend. And Walt holds on to him and tells him it's all right. That's the shape of it. The man who poisoned a child holds the boy who worked it out and tells him it's all right. And then, 2 seasons later, in the desert, in Confessions, Jesse finally says it out loud. Walt has come to sell him a fresh start. New identity, new town, a job he likes, maybe a girl, maybe a family. All the things Jesse wanted before any of this began, presented as an opportunity rather than what it is, which is an exile arranged for Walt's convenience because Hank wants Jesse as an informant. And Jesse stands there and refuses the frame. He tells Walt to stop the concerned dad routine. He says it plainly. It's either this or you kill me like you killed Mike. Isn't that what this is about? He's right. He's completely right, and he's the only person in the entire series who names the pattern to Walt's face while it's happening. And Walt just walks over and hugs him, and Jesse cries in his arms anyway. That's the bit I can't get past, honestly. Being seen through changed nothing at all. I've thought a fair bit about why the manipulation of Jesse hits harder than any of the rest of it, and I've landed on something fairly simple. Everyone else Walt works on is defending themselves. Skylar is suspicious. Hank is investigating. Gus is calculating. They're all, in their different ways, opponents in a game they at least partly understand. Jesse isn't. Jesse trusts him. From the RV in the pilot to the desert in Confessions, the thing Walt is actually exploiting is a young man's willingness to believe that somebody finally cares whether he lives or dies. And the awful part is that somebody did care. That's what makes it work at all. What strikes me, having spent this long with it, is how little of it requires cleverness. Almost none of these moves are complicated. They work because Walt pays close attention to people and everyone else is a bit distracted by their own lives. And that's why I think those 62 episodes hold up to being watched 5, 6, 7 times. The first time you're following the plot. After that, you start watching the small stuff, where he puts his hands, which word he chooses. The pause before he answers a question he already knew was coming. It's a different show once you know, and it's arguably a better one. I've got a couple of things I'd like to make next, if you're interested. One on Gus Fring, who runs an almost opposite system, all patience and structure and long silences, and who I think is the more frightening of the two. And one on Skylar, who I'd happily argue is the most misread character in modern television. The other thing I keep circling back to is that none of it saved him. Every technique in this video worked more or less for years, and he still ended up with his family gone, his money in a barrel in the desert, and a boy he ruined driving away without looking back. It was never really a strategy. It was a habit he couldn't put down, and it kept working right up until the point where there was nobody left worth fooling. Anyway, that's plenty for one night. If you're still awake and you fancy going round again, the pilot is a genuinely different experience once all of this is in your head. Thanks for keeping me company, and sleep well wherever you are.